Have you told this story on the podcast yet about when the CIA tried to recruit you and you didn't really notice because you thought it was about Proust? It just seems salient to what we're talking about today.
Okay. For the record, I do not necessarily know if it was the CIA that did this, though that would be my suspicion for a variety of reasons that I will tell shortly.
Paranoid reasons.
That's fine. This whole episode and this entire film is about how it's actually correct to understand your relationship to knowledge as fundamentally paranoiac. So, and undecidable.
Okay, so here's the story. Like, I was a freshman at a institution which has a certain notoriety as being a feeder for people in the diplomatic corps or people who are in embassies as like cultural attachés or otherwise involved in the bloodless yet surprisingly bloody work that is the maintenance of our empire, right? But in any event, like I was 18. And it was the first month of college. 9/11 had just happened. Everyone I knew who was ambitious and who would go on to actually was going to learn Arabic and become a spy, like in that way. And I didn't really. That was the furthest thing from my mind. Essentially, I wanted to do like classics and was starting to get into the psychoanalysis stuff. So it's my freshman year of college, and I've been called to visit my advisor. And so I'm sitting in this guy's office for the first of what were supposed to be many more meetings. And the guy is looking, and it's a sumptuous office in a beautiful building that's all sort of like that kind of red brick and Tudor art and stolen artifacts and shit. And this guy, who is not coincidentally a prominent literature professor, but also sort of like a let's say a big deal in like certain like expatriate nonprofit groups and sort of dissident political movements in a Eastern/Central European country, which is has been a place where there has been a lot of political ferment over the years, and it wasn't color revolutions hadn't happened yet, but this is 2001. But again, some stuff I later had learned some stuff about like sort of the role of these institutions or at least what they would part of what they would do. In any event, this guy, who I think is meeting me just to like guide me through the process, is at his leather-bound sort of desk, surrounded by all these books in ancient Slavic languages, and proceeds to like talk to me about my course of study, or at least I think is trying to talk to me about my course of study.
Uh-huh.
And he starts asking me questions that are weird, but also I'm getting a vibe that's like a little bit negative, like a kind of negging thing. Yeah.
Like what kind of questions?
So he starts saying things like, so I see that you read French and speak French, and you have a little bit of German, and you've done some Italian. So you seem to, in the classics as well, and you seem to be very good at language. Would you say you're good at languages? And I say, well, yeah, I hope so. I mean, I'm taking Greek this year. And he's like, well, you'll get an A in that, no problem, right? And of course, I actually would go on to get a C because I just didn't attend a fifth of it. But I was like, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And then he said, I've noticed also that you've done some traveling, and particularly you've been in places in Southern Europe. That's really wonderful. Do you like to travel? And I said, yeah, most people do like to travel. Totally. Yeah, man. And I just want to get the fuck out of here. Like co-sign the fact that
You're like 18.
I'm like 18. I'm putting together this thing where it's like, I'm taking a course called like trees and like the magic of stars. Right. And like, I'm just putting together something very basic. My priorities are not on, I have no idea whatever this guy's priorities are.
Right.
They're not mine. And then he says, I noticed particularly your interest in Proust. Proust, of course, is a great writer of detail. And would you say that you are yourself a detail man, and you like to notice details? And at this point, I'm thinking that, I don't know, I have...
Did you think he was coming on to you?
I thought he wanted to fuck me.
It kind of vibes like that.
Yeah.
I mean, the voice you're doing.
Yeah, and like, look, like I was at this point, I was like completely baffled, insulted, felt kind of weird and creepy, also incredibly hungover because like literally the day before I had shaved my head entirely bald. Like I did, clearly, as he may not have been picking up on.
You did have different priorities.
Yeah, I had very, very different priorities, and those priorities were essentially like drinking and girls. Like it was, those were the things. And so I was like, yeah, sure, totally, absolutely. He's like, well, as you know, as you continue to meet these sort of gold level or exceptional grades, I'm sure we'll be meeting, and I'll be talking about some exciting interviews, some exciting opportunities, and I look forward to charting your progress through 4 years here and beyond, right? And I never saw the fucker again. I literally never went to another meeting. I'm like, this guy's a creep.
So how did you actually figure out that he was trying to recruit you for an intelligence agency?
Well, now
Or trying to groom you for intelligence work?
One, I learned a lot more about the history of the CIA in general at its institutions, right?
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
non-trivially, if you read something like Tim Weiner's Legacy of Ashes, right? Or if you start to learn about, oh, hell, if you read like Le Carré novels, you start to learn that like elite educational institutions offer these encounters, which are like a kind of grooming, you might say, in which...
But there's quite a lot of plausible deniability.
Yes. But also like later getting more savvy about like who would be writing papers from this institute to justify various political developments, et cetera. Like it had all those red flags. And I will say that people in the circles that I was traveling with in this way did wind up going into intelligence work.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Would you say that you are a detail man? Listening to Ordinary Unhappiness, a podcast about psychoanalysis, politics, pop culture, and the ways we suffer now. I'm Abby Kluchin.
I'm Patrick Blanchfield.
I'm Dan Yowell.
And today we are talking about the absolutely wild 1967 film, The President's Analyst.
What a banger. I've never heard of this film. I've never seen it. Patrick, you kind of pulled it out of nowhere and were like, we should watch this. I wasn't sure what to expect. The 60s are like a weird time for film, and I didn't know if this was going to be like some weird American hero worship-y roadshow style film or something more subversive. And oh man, was this more subversive than I was expecting.
Absolutely. Yeah. It had everything. It had hippies. It had two intelligence agencies whose names were censored, as far as I could tell, personally by J. Edgar Hoover.
Yep.
It was pulled out of theaters early by Hoover because he didn't like the description of the Intelligence Committee and also the guy who, who runs the quote unquote FBR.
Yep.
Yes, in this film there is the FBR and the CEA. It has an incredible, it's like an incredible meditation on like how if you're paranoid, you're probably right. I mean, which just fits so perfectly with where we are in our discussion of Lacan and, the relationship to knowledge as never being something about just content, but also being about lack and desire and paranoia. It's going to give us a way to talk about intelligence agencies, about the phone company, about the big other. Honestly, banger. And I think it has this like incredible thing about how if you just kill people, you're going to be so much better adjusted. Because like, guess what? You don't have to sublimate that shit. No. And I've never seen a movie just kind of put that. I mean, that could be the, quiet thesis of every action film ever. But here they just lay it right on out.
In the opening scene.
The opening scene.
Yep.
It's a movie that's like a little bit quote unquote spy thriller, but also very much spy comedy.
Yeah.
And it has this kind of aesthetic that I presume some of our listeners will associate with like Austin Powers type stuff, but It's actually from this era, right? For the bell bottoms and the weird cars that transform into things, and everyone is wearing shades of yellow and like mustard and such. But also
drinking LSD,
tons of drugs.
Yep.
And also it's got some moments that almost in this kind of anti-war aspect, in this surrealist way, resemble stuff that I was thinking about films it's like The King of Hearts or even like an Altman movie. Like there's some notes of Altman Smash. But strictly speaking, this film is from 67.
Yep.
Right. It's from Johnson is still president. Tet hasn't happened in Vietnam, though Vietnam is a feature of this. The assassinations of 68, and subsequently haven't happened.
Yep.
And yet somehow this film not only kind of stages these structures of paranoia and these anxieties that characterize the Cold War U.S. in the mid-60s, it kind of also seems to anticipate where things are going, not just in terms of like these breakdowns of civil order in the 60s and 70s later, but also really uncannily in the 21st century moment with the way it kind of deals with questions of like the big other and projection and surveillance. It's a wild movie.
By the time the credits rolled, I think all three of us looked at each other and were like, this movie has not aged a day.
Yeah.
This could have come out today.
I also want to say, we haven't brought this up, but even though it only really is dealing with race in some of the opening scenes, it actually very much does. So do you mind if we get into this by talking about like the basic plot structure, and then also some of the opening scenes where there are some just like incredible sort of reversals, reveals, etc.
Well, before we dive right in, because I'm excited to meet the president's analyst.
Yes.
I thought I would give a little bit of context behind the film.
Yes, please.
There's actually a really fascinating history behind this film that we're going to be talking about, I'm sure, throughout most of this episode. But I'll keep it brief. It's written and directed by Theodore Flicker, who came up in the 50s in Chicago. He was one of the early proponents of improv comedy, started an improv club, started traveling around. He shot some episodes of TV before he started getting into his film career. And so that includes like the Dick Van Dyke Show, Streets of San Francisco, The Night Gallery, some real classics. His first film was The Troublemaker. And I'm only mentioning this right now. That was from 1964 because it is a story about a naive farmer that travels to New York and then finds himself a fish out of water story, which in a lot of ways parallels this movie. Yeah, a rural farmer having to adapt to New York City.
Yeah.
Anyway, long story short, Flicker is at a Hollywood bigwig party, rubbing elbows with fancy, important people. And I'm going to quote him here. He met a sweaty little guy who we found out from talking to him was an analyst who worked for the government, who was the psychiatrist for the top military and governmental brass. And he was fascinated by this guy must have so many secrets in his head.
Yeah.
And that kicked off him writing this film.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's our background. Also, I don't know, from like a little bit of a film history perspective.
Please.
This came out in 67. So which means they started working on this 64, 65. This is in the era in Hollywood of these massive, we're talking 4.5 hour, 5 hour long films that would tour the country in what's called a road show. And while they had a long, what is between like the 20s and the early 60s, road shows were a common thing, a big cultural events. It was around like the early 60s, especially I think of like Cleopatra and what that did to 20th Century Fox, collapsed that as a mode of earning money on your films. So the studios, instead of doing these massively big budgeted tentpole films, turned to younger filmmakers. So this is the same time as like Francis Ford Coppola was getting his start. Polanski was starting to make movies. Film studios started giving much more compact budgets to younger independent filmmakers. And importantly, giving them creative freedom with those budgets to do whatever they wanted with.
You can really see that in this case.
Yes. And it's also, I'm only mentioning that because how the studio reacts to not only the film, but governmental pressure about the film, revoking that creative freedom is kind of striking in a film about paranoia.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And we should just to say this too, for those of you who may have heard of Flicker at all, right? If you know of him, you probably do know of him because he was the writer and director of one of the longer running cop sitcoms, I think called Barney Miller, which ran from the late 70s, somewhere in the 80s.
75 to the early 80s. Yeah.
And the reason why he did that is basically because he was persona non grata in Hollywood after this film.
He's on the record as saying that what happened to this film, essentially being censored by the American government, kicked out of theaters, marketing like materials torn off walls. He ended up losing his home over it. It completely bankrupted him. He never really got work again outside of that sitcom. So are we going to meet the president's analyst?
Let's do it.
I got to hurry. I'm going to be late for my analyst.
Are you neurotic? Psychotic? Do you show signs of extreme hostility, aggression, anxiety? Have you blown your mind? Popped your mod? See strange things? Perhaps you should see a psychiatrist.
The president is overworked, overtired, overburdened. He needs to talk to someone outside the stresses of his supercharged life.
Spoiler, we're never going to meet the president. This was a little bit of a disappointment to me because I was hoping for like the 1967 version of like Josh from the West Wing deals with the trauma specialist who eventually goes to work with Martin Sheen. And it's okay because this like really masculine, but also like Winnicottian maternal containing analyst will help Bartlett like disburden himself of like the woes of the world that he has to carry from being the leader of the free world. Anyway, that does not happen in this movie. What does happen as we open, and some of my favorite part of this was actually the opening, so I'm going to spend a little more time on that, is we have a sort of aerial view in what seems to be what I assumed was the garment district in Manhattan, because the man that they keep cutting to is rolling a garment cart through the streets of the city. And it's cutting between that and the office of Dr. Sidney Schaefer, played by James Coburn, who is a really like menacing Mr. Rogers looking motherfucker.
Yeah.
Like,
He's got like 60s Play-Doh face.
Yeah. And so he's seeing like a whole suite of patients. And some of them are in sort of classic analytic posture, and then it gets like weirder and weirder. And meanwhile, we're cutting back and forth between that and the city streets. Godfrey Cambridge who is going to show up in the analyst chair in just a minute. Is the guy who's wheeling this rack, and we see him kill somebody and put them like disguised into the rack. Like, so he's disguised by the clothes. It's very Anna Wintour coded. And then we see him, he's wearing a wig and he like finishes this and he's like, I gotta go to therapy.
I gotta go therapy.
Okay, Don, we'll take it from here. Good. I gotta hurry. I'm gonna be late for my analyst.
It's delightful because we get these scenes of like old downtown Manhattan with like the big boat-shaped cars, and everyone is smoking.
The old cabs.
Yeah, and there's no World Trade Center there yet, and Godfrey Cambridge is walking around. It's black actor walking around in a t-shirt that says Dizzy Gillespie for president. And as you see him
didn't notice that.
As you see him moving this like thing of shirts.
Garment rack.
Yeah, the garment rack, it becomes clear he's tailing a guy, a sort of a swarthy, strange, suspicious looking fellow of ambiguous like Middle Eastern European vibes, who's just done some sort of handoff with somebody. And now when Godfrey Cambridge follows him for several blocks and then maneuvers the rack to trap him and then stabs him, throws the body into the cart and then takes it into like a loft where he meets a bunch of guys in tweed and is like, I can't be late for my analyst. and all this sort of kinetic movement is juxtaposed with the scenes from the analyst's office. And can we just talk about the decor in the analyst's office for 1 second, like what the scene is like?
Oh, sure. I mean, one of the things that's really noteworthy about this film is the art. One of the scenes, we'll get to this, actually takes place in the Whitney, but even in here, I mean, I was like, is that a Brancusi? Yeah. It's like there's a lot of very intense abstract and also representational sculpture. But it's a real classic analyst couch. It's like sort of like smarmy sexy too, like kind of like a leather tufted number.
Yeah. It kind of actually hearing that story about your college professor, probably something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it definitely, it's either like high-end analyst or like creepy bachelor pad.
Yeah,
that's good.
It's got this particular type of masculinity.
With a little Victorian, the classic sort of Victorian analytic couch.
Big black leather couch, lots of wooden varnished surfaces.
Beautiful desk. Beautiful desk.
Yeah, and the character of the therapy that he's doing, it's all silent, right? Because Lalo Schifrin's lovely score is sort of, you don't hear the dialogue, it's running over everything, but the patients include like old women who are sort of complaining, and then you see him nodding sympathetically. You have a businessman who starts crying, and not only does Schaefer hand him a tissue, you can see Schaefer beginning to cry as well. You then also have like a youth type guy who's like doing weird like Qigong karate stuff to express some emotion, and Coburn gets up and like joins him. And it's unclear if he's doing like classical Freudian analysis, if he's doing some sort of self-relational thing, but you get the sense that this guy is high end, he's engaged with his patients, and he does weird stuff. He's willing to lean into it.
Very confident. He's very confident. So we see Godfrey Cambridge, who's in film name is Don Masters. We see him. He's the one who's killed somebody in the garment rack. And he's in this sort of classical analytic posture, sprawled on the couch. And it's like, I mean, it's hammering the point home, right? Like, we are now in session. I had a weird dream last night. And he goes through this long monologue.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful, and it is entirely about race. And he also rejects the analytic frame. He's like, he gets up and he's like, I don't want to be on the couch. And he says that, he's dreaming about the day. I mean, I'm not going to use this slur, but that it's the day that he found out basically about his racial identity. And there's a long story about like his discovery of race through kids on the street yelling at him, yelling a racial slur at him. And he's looking around to see like what's being yelled at. And his brother tells him that it's him. And he starts to hit the brother. And then he switches from this story seamlessly into talking about killing an Albanian double agent, and is like, oh yeah, I'm a CEA agent. As in, CIA, but it's all dubbed in. And there is this incredible exchange where the agent is like, well, it bothers me that I don't feel guilty. Isn't this psychotic? And now this is a direct quote. And James Coburn goes, no, it explains your utter lack of hostility. You can vent your aggressive feelings by actually killing people. It's a sensational solution to the hostility problem. At which point, Patrick, Dan, and I were on the floor being like, oh, he solved the problem of sublimation. Just kill people in a way that is sanctioned by the government. You get to have your murder and your paycheck too.
It's at this point, I think that we should, a couple things to say about this, and hopefully we can include some clips of the monologue, because Godfrey Cambridge is an amazing actor.
Yeah. He just really sells this.
I hated him and I hit him. I hated me and I hit him. And I rammed that knife into his heart.
What?
The Albanian. I killed him. I stuck that knife into him. And he was my brother, and he was me, and I hated him.
What are you talking about?
He was an Albanian double agent. He had secret information that threatened the security of our country. My assignment was to kill him. And I did a while ago on 7th Avenue.
There's almost a Shakespearean aspect of the way he delivers this, but the story that he tells of essentially being thrust into a world as a child and realizing that there is a category of persons who do not have equal claim to rights and who are in fact all summed up on this like this slur that identifies them.
Yes.
And his realizing actually that he is in that through this encounter with the other that like alienates him from himself.
Yeah.
And that then subsequently is expressed in, well, he goes to his brother to tell him this, the brother reveals, oh, actually, no, you were running around saying the slur as though that was something not you. It's you've made even more of a fool of yourself, right? And you've somehow validated this racism, or at least become a case study in sort of its amusing antics for these white children. As a story, it actually very strongly resembles some stuff that like is almost not quite verbatim, but gamed out pretty much identically in Black Skin, White Mask by Fanon. He describes this experience of like, I thought I was a child, but then I realized I am not a child, or rather my participation in like the universal worlds of child's play and child representations, right? It's not just like they were yelling the name of a boogeyman. They're yelling something about me that puts me in my place and produces an alienation of my own body. And it's very psychoanalytically, I think, astute as a process of like alienation. And then when he narrates the story that builds the Freudian slip, the parapraxis, he's right. I started hitting my brother, and then I stabbed him. That's when and it's like I started hitting my brother and hitting myself, and that's when I slid the blade into the Albanian, right? And so it becomes clear that like there's the working through of this stuff. And I should say that this is this is contemporaneous too. I'm trying to think, we'll have to check this, like when that remarkable novel and film, The Spy Who Sat at the Door, came out. Mm-hmm. But again, it's giving back these psychoanalytic themes, but also like it gives us right up at the front, over and against even like the spy drama type stuff, this fact that there is this ugly, cruel, dehumanizing racism that exists in this country.
Flicker is on the record by saying that this story, the monologue that is delivered here, was actually a story told to him as a firsthand experience by the actress Diana Sands, who's famous for her role in Raisin in the Sun.
Oh, wow.
It hit so hard in the movie, and it felt so raw and real, and to find out that it actually was like literally what happened.
Yeah.
And then in response to it, our friend James Coburn is like, this is fascinating. It's amazing that you're a CIA agent. You've resolved this problem.
Don't you think that's psychotic behavior?
No, I don't. No, it explains your utter lack of hostility. You can vent your aggressive feelings by actually killing people. It's a sensational solution to the hostility problem.
I have to write a paper about it.
Yeah.
It is then immediately undercut, even though later we do see that this agent he's still in analysis with James Coburn, who I should probably be calling Dr. Sidney Schaefer. Dr. Sidney Schaefer. He's in analysis with Dr. Sidney Schaefer. He's there. I mean, he's doing actual analysis. He is a patient, but at the same time, he is there on a mission. And he is checking out the analyst, Schaefer, to see if he is suitable to be the president's analyst. And here's yet another, like, it's like the rug's pulled out from under you. The rug's pulled out from under you. You know, it's like Schaefer's own analyst, which it sort of seems like is also his training analyst, like his mentor, was also in on this.
Colonel Sanders looking guy.
Yeah. And so it's this really interesting moment where we start with the sort of image of, you know, what we have talked about a lot on this podcast of the analyst is the subject supposed to know. And then, you know, that status as being in genuine relation to knowledge immediately starts slipping away because he's being cased, you know, instead of the one conducting cases, like he is literally being cased. They're casing the joint, which is his office, which is his ability to, you know, maintain a therapeutic space.
Our patient even reveals that he's bugged the office.
Yes.
And yet instead of like this...
Personally.
He's personally bugged the office.
Who would bug my office?
Like, I think it's even he put a ribbon on one of Schaefer's degrees, and that's a bug, like an extra ribbon that the guy didn't notice. And then this kind of keys us into what's Schaefer's overall reaction, because as he processes this, and then as he then goes to a meeting with his supervising analyst at the Whitney, who's basically been handling him the whole time and is aware of this process. And
which 100% makes me think of this person trying to recruit you. It was like, that was the...
Do you like this art? I don't like this art, but you do. And that's why you're the president. Like, because you can like look at this like Michael Cera, because you can look at this like, I don't know, like Jackson Pollock and not think it's shit. You will be like the Freud for our time, because you're a man of your time, for the greatest man in the country, in the world even. It's sort of like the type of stuff that's said. But at no point does, at least this point in the film, at no point does Schaefer seem to register the fact that he says like, oh, it's a violation, but he does not feel targeted or anxious. Instead, he feels incredibly flattered and
jubilant. I kept thinking about our discussion of the mirror stage and like the jubilant baby regarding himself. And it is like hilarious the way that this is portrayed in the film.
When do I see him?
You leave for Washington tomorrow.
Tomorrow? What about my patients?
It's a little complicated, but I'm taking care of it.
It's certainly an unprecedented opportunity.
I have to admit it, I envy you.
The president.
Goodbye, my son.
Thank you, sir.
I'm going to walk. Okay, Sidney, I'll see you tomorrow. Pick you up around about noon.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
He's so happy. And again, he has this face where his joy face is like a weird rictus. He's on top of the Statue of Liberty. Then he's on the Brooklyn Bridge and he's looking at the Empire State Building.
Yeah, we get like an I've made it montage that spans the whole city.
With a soundtrack. Oh my God, that soundtrack. It goes from like Joy to the World to Old Lang Syne to dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, all done in this kind of like
ethereal, like
a little Joni Mitchell,
Yeah.
but pop lighty sort of, and he's just walking on air, and like he's literally on the top of every single landmark in Manhattan,
Yeah.
gazing out in pride and joy.
Nowhere to go but down.
Total narcissistic inflation.
Watching me, being everywhere.
And then we actually see him in a relation where he is acting like deeply narcissistic. We see it cuts to him, and I was actually surprised by this. I don't know why I was, but with this like maybe max 20-something looking girl, and I'm saying girl because she's written
She
to look
looks
like a
like a
girl,
child.
not
Yeah.
like a woman.
Yeah.
And he is easily in his 40s. And she is giving this monologue that is like straight like trad wife stuff about like how she wants to be a female slave, and like it is like 100% like trad wife TikTok content, but in 1967. But she also doesn't want to get married, and he really wants her to. And the way that he asserts this is he refers to her as Mrs. Me.
Yeah.
And he says,
Look, I love you, and it's my professional opinion that you love me too.
at which point I started like wanting to throw things at this man and decided that he deserved anything that he got.
And it acts as very good foreshadowing for what her character turns out to be later.
Yeah.
That I want to be with you and close to you, but we shouldn't make this a legal pairing. It actually kind of pans out pretty well
Oh,
for her
yeah, I
character.
hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
That way. So it's pretty wild. And now we switch into the Washington portion of the film.
He gets to Washington, and it becomes clear that this is all happening in precipitous haste. There's a feverish manic energy here.
His first session is the day he arrives in Washington.
Yes.
And they have a car ready for him. They have a house ready for him. They've like deposited his girlfriend there.
One of my favorite recurring jokes is they have what is essentially like a bat signal in, I guess, every room of every building that this guy could possibly be in, that anytime the president needs therapy, just bam, 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 this alarm goes off.
And it's a red light.
Yeah.
It's so the funny, and it's, you know, I mean, so he could be sleeping, he could be whatever, and they have this whole thing about how like he's like, well, should I expect the president? And he's like, no, he expects you.
I think one of the funnier shots in this moment is where there's a whole montage of him being summoned for emergency therapy sessions, and he's eating a bowl of soup. and
That's
the soup,
funniest. So the
Yeah.
soup
Starts-
starts splashing
Yeah.
red, and it's like that's when this starts to teeter into like real, truly like surrealist.
Psychedelic kind of
Psychedelic, but it's like surrealist and psychedelic. But the red flashing light is funny, and it's very, you know, it's an
It's farcical
ambulance,
and-
it's
yeah.
a fire truck. But then when it comes out of the soup,
Yeah.
He
It
starts
is-
hallucinating it. Yeah.
it is just like it's you don't know how much of this is sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
So there is this. We should just say so. When he gets to Washington, it turns out there are two authority figures in the film, or like there are two aspects of American power that we meet. Right. The one is the head of this thing that's called the CEA, which is the Central Inquiries Agency.
And it sounds weird because it's overdubbed from CIA every single time.
Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
And he's and the head of this is the classical, and here I think it's helpful to know, like there is during this period, but also more generally, there's a sort of distinction made between the CIA and the FBI, right? So the CIA agent, the CIA director, represents the CIA insofar as the CIA is understood to be more quote unquote liberal. It's more diverse. It involves people who learn foreign languages and do things like, you know, I don't know, fund the Paris Review and you know, they're the cultural attaches of the world, right? They're sophisticated, they infiltrate, etc. For example, well, Don Masters, right, is the black agent, right?
Yes.
When we see the FBI, they are all men, and I think they're exclusively white, at least as far as the film is done. So anyways, we have this cigar smoking, elbow patch wearing, tweed suit, kindly CIA guy who's like, don't worry, we're going to take CEA guy, we're going to take care of you. This is very,
it's funny every time.
Yeah.
And the reason the CEA guy is being so accommodating is because the head of the FBR, which is called the Federal Bureau of Regulation, is well, is a fellow named Lux. Right now, Lux is the pun that's sort of lost, but like there is the Electrolux vacuum,
Yep.
right? And so the Lux is to the Electrolux vacuum as Hoover was to the Hoover vacuum is sort of the joke.
Yes.
Oh, I was 100% I 100% missed that and was just like, lux, light, like it's illumination. It gets in. Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's an Electrolux trick. Okay.
Yeah. It's not, I mean, like the humor is probably more in the physical comedy of it because the fellow who plays Lux, Walter Burke, who you may have seen, he's an extremely small, emaciated man who I think like played goblins and stuff in various movies and like witches and things. Yeah.
You know who he reminds me of is Armin Shimerman, who plays the principal in Buffy. He's got that kind of energy.
Yeah.
Really small, menacing, like Napoleon complex kind of guy.
Mr. Big and Rocky and Bullwinkle kind of stuff too. Like he's a tiny little guy. He's wearing all black. And his agents are all, as opposed to when we see scenes of the other of the CIA agents, they're all sitting on the floor and they're hippies and there are books everywhere. His agents are all wearing identical gray suits. They all have the exact same height, haircut, and blank stares. And he is moralizing. Part of his concern is he seems to be has an antipathy towards therapy. He seems to suggest also that he thinks it's very bad that Dr. Schaefer is living out of wedlock with this young woman.
The girl. I say he don't get the job till he improves his morals.
And
as if she's even old enough to get married.
Yeah, it's in other ways seems to be extremely well. I mean, it's not coincidental.
He's not countercultural.
He's not countercultural, and his organization is all men, which is another data point, right? And I should say here, just to give a little bit of historical context, this is a pretty 65 through 67 are an interesting period in American history, right? And a thing to say here is that as a parody of Hoover, this goes against a lot of the grain of what we might expect, right? We retroactively, I think we'll talk about Hoover as a bad guy and he was an atrocious person, right? But the idea that there would be vicious, mocking comic portrayals of him goes against the grain of the fact that Hoover was incredibly popular in the US for the last years of his life. This is before many things have come to light, whether it be, his involvement in with the civil rights movement, but also he's a little less politically active. And but in a few years, like the right is going to try and there are people who want to run for president. And the book I want to recommend on this, without going too far into it, because I think we could also talk about this book and the Hoover biography in general, but Beverly Gage's recent 825-page biography of Hoover, G-Man, gets into a lot of this.
Oh yeah, you were giving me some like juicy little nuggets from that as you were reading it.
Yeah, and
so I can recommend as somebody who heard tiny bits of it.
So the thing to know about Hoover, right, in this context, is that Hoover is a martinet, right? Hoover, look. I think maybe we could do an actual episode and perhaps we get Dr. Gage on here to talk about this, right? But among other things, Hoover is all about order. Like, became notorious for like maintaining fitness and hair and grooming standards in the agency, which he himself could not meet. And this is also another way to like think about that CIA, CEA, FBI, FBR distinction, right?
Interesting.
If the CIA is coming from Ivy League, like area studies, language types, right? And recruiting from like the upper classes, the backbone of the FBI at this point is understood to be more working class. There's a particular emphasis on like Catholic education, sort of like in universities that are like Notre Dame, et cetera. But also Hoover himself and his biography is pretty fucking fascinating, was a avid graduate member and supporter of the Kappa Alpha fraternity, which is, among other things at the time was like a straight up white supremacist frat, but was all about young, active, physical, clean cut men as the face of the agency. Also in his personal life, that was his preference. And so one of the other things to say here, which this movie doesn't really get into at all, but which is another one of those things that people would say things about, but was also open knowledge in the sense that like everyone knew it, but also Hoover was so beloved, right? Is that Hoover, was living as a gay man, right, with a partner with Clyde Tolson for nearly 44 years at this point, right? There's a lot we could say here and connect to this, to like what we were opening it with, namely like institutional cultures of secrecy and desire, and particularly the way in which the Lux character resembles Hoover insofar as that he's really invested in like moralizing, in particular sexual morality,
Mhm.
and like really condemnatory in this way. But what I wanted to quickly share, just as one aside here,
Please.
is a note from the Beverly Gage book that bears specifically on J. Edgar Hoover's relationship to psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
Ooh,
lay it on
interesting.
us.
The one thing I kind of also just do want to say, right, is that what Hoover did more than anything else is he was a master bureaucrat and tremendously good at filing and keeping notes, right? He produces a surveillance state, you sort of avant la lettre. But also this kind of has a kind of other valence insofar as that when we go to his journals for like college years and stuff, he spends a lot of time described as like clerical paperwork. God knows what that is in addition to his jobs. But apparently the guy liked paperwork. He liked having files on people, right?
I mean, who doesn't?
Well,
Not me.
I'm kidding. I mean, psychoanalysts do have files on people.
They do.
Just, point that out.
And but also here, so this is one of his first romantic interests is Melvin Purvis, right? Who you may remember as being the guy played, I think, by Kevin Costner in The Untouchables. This is the person who smashed Bonnie and Clyde.
Oh,
right?
interesting.
Yeah. I think, but the guy who basically brought down Bonnie and Clyde, right? And Purvis is a very good-looking man, and had a very strange relationship with Hoover, where Hoover like supported him tremendously and would always write these letters, not just about how good he looked, but how all these other women must have been saying how good he looked. And then eventually Purvis started getting more press, and they had some professional differences, and Hoover kind of buried him. But here's one note in this letter from Hoover to Purvis that I wanted to give us just for data point, because it gets into this idea of the erotics of knowledge and surveillance.
With the erotics of surveillance.
Yes.
Intriguing.
Over the next few weeks, the two men exchanged sayings, strange expressions like faint heart never won a fair lady, or soft in love, soft in head, that became the basis for an elaborate but cryptic exchange that danced around questions of marriage, desire, and perhaps even sexual orientation. On March 20, Purvis noted, "Those sayings you mentioned recently do not apply to me. There may be a saying, though, that does apply." Hoover, further intrigued, wrote back 3 days later, "Your postscript starts me guessing again," he informed Purvis. "I would like to know what saying you had in mind so I can properly catalog you." Right? And then after 44, later when he writes, yeah, I know. Later when he, the Tolson is his partner for 44 years and like literally described as an alter ego. Like a lot of the kind of manic language actually that Schaefer talks about his partner here is kind of bears on how he viewed Tolson. But he eventually got Tolson like issued this statement describing his industriousness, his hard working, his eye for detail, all this type of stuff, right? But so that's there. But here's a specific tie with psychoanalysis. Hoover never acknowledged publicly that concerns over secrecy and homosexuality, bachelors and security lists had much to do with his own life. There is, however, some intriguing evidence that he worried about these things. In the summer of 1947, an enterprising reporter at the Los Angeles Times secretly trailed Hoover and Tolson while watching them as they strolled the city on vacation. Undetected, the reporter observed them purchase ice cream at the farmer's market and then wander into a nearby bookstore. Tolson bought a few lurid mass market westerns. Hoover picked up 2 serious works of psychology, Our Inner Conflicts and Self-Analysis, both by the eminent German-born psychoanalyst Karen Horney.
Good taste.
Gage walks through these books, noting, for example, that Horney's theory is all about perfectionist drives and the toll taken by rigid self-control and the need for admiration or a compulsive craving for power and prestige. And also, crucially, that a lot of this will will sort of cluster around a feeling of arbitrary rightness and aggressive hostility to anyone who seems to live a different way. But the question here is like, it's interesting that Hoover seems to want to indulge on a course of self-analysis because he is, well, perhaps somewhat scared about divulging things to actual analysts.
Sure.
And then here's the second half of this sort of thing. It's a little unclear about some of this stuff, but apparently in 1946, he briefly saw a young psychiatrist, right? Hoover, named Marshall G. Ruffin, who later went on to serve as mental health commissioner for the District Superior Court. Summers never interviewed Ruffin. This is the journalist Summers, whose work Gage is drawing on, who was dead by the 1990s. But Ruffin's wife claimed that Hoover had been, quote, troubled by homosexuality, as her husband had indiscreetly hinted more than once. My understanding was that Hoover got very paranoid about anyone trying to find out he was a homosexual and got scared of the psychiatry angle. Well, decades-old hearsay is hardly definitive evidence, especially since Ruffin burned all his patient records. It does offer possible context for Hoover's turn towards self-analysis. In any event, holding on to a idealized image often required increasing levels of social isolation to avoid facing up to critical comments and challenges. This is the Hornite again, right? So right here, I think we have like one of the central themes of the movie, right? Apart from just the intertext with Hoover, which is like this, like the need to disburden and to have a self who you can talk to. Is a theme over and over. Both the CIA agent is like, the president is the most has the most on his mind of anyone in the world, and now he has to kiss. He has no one to confide it to. Now finally he has that, but also a fear of being known, and the way in which like people who have secrets of various sorts may be all the more driven to like collect the secrets of others, etc. And so he actually almost feels like a David Lynch character, like this little, very, very small, very ominous man, both stands in for J. Edgar Hoover, but seems to stand in for like espionage state knowledge as such.
Yeah. And I mean, so speaking of espionage state knowledge, this, the what was then the incipient surveillance state, we are now at the portion of the film where within what feels diegetically, at least, like moments of Schaefer seeing the president. And again, we never see a single session. We only see him going indoors and exiting doors, like and he goes in, he goes out, he goes in, he goes out. He's just wearing a different suit. That's the only thing that marks
Maybe worth noting that when he goes in, he's clean cut, professional, put together. And every time he emerges, he's gradually more disheveled.
Absolutely. And exactly because of what Patrick is talking about, the idea of like, oh, well, there's this one person who needs to disburden himself, and he has now become the person who is the repository of secrets, who cannot disburden himself. And almost immediately he starts to crack.
If I were an analyst, which I am, I would say I was rapidly turning into a paranoid personality, which I am.
Isn't there an analyst you could go to?
Every other psychiatrist in this country has another doctor he can talk to, not me.
Sydney.
Presidency used to be the loneliest job in the world. Now even he has someone to talk to. He can talk to me.
I'm here.
We can't even go to bed together. I'll talk in my sleep and they'll arrest you.
Honey, why don't you just quit?
I can't. I know too much. They'd never let me get away. They would never let me get away. Well, you see, I'm paranoid. I am paranoid.
I don't think you're paranoid. I think you have a firm grasp on reality.
Listen, shh. Do you have any idea how badly the Russians and the Chinese and even the Cubans, for God's sake, want to get a hold of me?
He is rapidly becoming paranoid. And, he has a conversation with himself even where he's like, am I becoming paranoid? I actually wrote this down verbatim. Why don't I simply and clinically find out? And then it very quickly turns into like, is this a dream sequence? He says like, I was right. I'm paranoid. They're all spies. And it's like his girlfriend is there with a gun. Everybody he's like in this restaurant with this soup bowl. He's spiraling really, really fast. And just when you think like, oh, it's just a dream, and you as a viewer and Schaefer as a character are going to be able to get a handle on the situation, the film completely breaks with reality. And we figure out that Nan, the girlfriend, actually is recording him. They've moved her from his house because he talks in his sleep and she can't hear. But it transpires that she actually is recording him. We see an incredible shot of her. She's wearing like these wonderful, actually very wonderful slip dresses. I would 100% wear. Not the point. But throughout the film, she's recording him. There's a gun on the nightstand. The drawer of the nightstand is full of this like 60s era recording stuff. And the lights are all trippy, like it's weird and trippy, and there's just this descent into paranoia. And in addition to what Dan was talking about the dishevelment and like the suits, we start to see him wearing this amazing blue terry cloth robe all of the time.
Yeah, he gets more and more paranoid over the obvious thing, which is namely that Well, two things. One, he can't share what he knows, right? He says he can't share it to his partner.
He's the terminus.
Right. Yes.
The president's analyst cannot have an
I think it's a line in the movie where he says, like, this great man who's burdened by all this information now has me for relief, but who do I have for relief?
Yeah.
And
nobody.
It starts out as he has me for relief. I can do this. I'm the only person capable of this. This exalts me to
it's
I'm
true
being driven
narcissistic
insane.
grandiosity.
Yeah.
Which is very short-lived.
And then it becomes but what do I do to discharge this? And he can't reach a supervising analyst. Nan is no longer allowed in the situation. And he begins
Plus
to start,
she's turned on him.
and he also, in the sense that he also is observing other people, Nan becomes one of clearly a small universe of people who are following him because as the analyst of the president, he has the president's secrets and knows things. And as this situation gets more and more untenable, he eventually decides to flee.
Yes. And the way he does it is hilarious. He basically, we get this wonderful, tons of shots of the White House and all these people queuing up for their tours. And he attaches himself as like a member of like the president's staff to a particular family from New Jersey.
You mean the president is really interested in what we really think, the Quantrills?
That's right. Now, if I may, I would like to stop by the hotel this afternoon and we can begin the interview.
Oh, well, we were planning to leave for home. That's Seaside Heights, New Jersey. We've got a pretty crowded weekend, but of course.
We could.
That's even better. The president always likes us to conduct our interviews on the subject's home ground.
Under the ruse of, the president actually really wants your opinions. I'm going to separate you out and learn about this from you because the president wants to hear from you, everyday Americans. He ends up going back with them to New Jersey, which then starts to unravel because it turns out that the wife is running off to her karate class and the husband has lots and lots of guns. And there's this incredible bit where the kid is has brought his car gun into his house and he's like, we have a house gun. Leave the car gun in the car.
These are liberal times.
Hey, Dad, you want the Magnum 357 in the house?
Darn it, Bing, I told you not to play around with my guns. No, I do not want that in the house. That is my car gun. My house gun is already in the house. Now put that right back in the glove compartment and don't let me catch you fooling with my guns again.
I'm sorry, Dad.
So our friend the analyst has gone it's actually kind of a neatly analytic sort of trajectory, right? Where he's been doing this work with this exceptional person, this president, in this strange space where the stakes are saturated with violence, anxiety, and everything. And then he goes back to the normal American home and he finds strangeness, anxiety, latent violence.
Yes.
Not so latent.
The political paradoxes of the political beliefs of the guy he interviews are wild.
The Bullocks next door, real right-wingers. American flag up every day. Real fascists. Ought to be gassed. You know the type.
Oh, yes.
Gas the right
Gas the
wing.
fascists, yeah. And he's completely sort of overwhelmed by this strange situation. And simultaneous to that, we now learn that his departure has been noted. We've been getting actually some interesting intercuts where as he moves around, and particularly as he flees, we see an unidentified face watching him on a screen, right? And then that identity is held for quite some time. But now that he has fled, we then get a rapid kind of almost airplane style montage of all the different intelligence agencies that are looking for him.
Oh, wait, hold on. One salient detail before then is that he, in the New Jersey family's house, he goes to once he's started to notice that things are a little uncanny, and that maybe he has jumped from the frying pan into the fire, he goes to make a phone call, and then we go see the long extension cord, and the little kid is recording with a junior spy kit. Anyway, so then we go back to the part where, at first it looks like it's just Russia, but it's every intelligence agency in the world is we have to kidnap him. And then finally a bunch of people are no, actually, we just got to kill him.
Yeah. And so it's the Russians, and we specifically meet a Russian agent named Kropotkin, played by Severn Darden, who is wonderful. and who turns out to have a close personal friendship relationship with our friend Don, the CIA agent.
Godfrey, yeah.
Godfrey. We also get a montage of everyone from, the Russians to the North Vietnamese to the British, and also including a group of unidentified African potentates and agencies talking in Hausa, right? It's some of this would not age well and is a little bit like, the racial stereotypes come fast and furious.
Yes.
But the idea is that everyone is looking for him. And at the end of the montage of everyone looking for him, we have the creepy Dr. Lux being like, just kill him. He's a loose end. We're going to kill him, right? So now our friend, Sidney Schaefer, is walking in Manhattan, unaware of what's about to happen to him with his friends, the Quantrills, these perfectly normal liberals, when suddenly the first of a sequence of attacks of random assassins, kind of John Wick style, come at him, right? And
This is yeah.
And the true to form, the character, his hosts react.
The suburban mother's response is like a delighted squeal, honey, muggers! And she gets to beat them up.
Muggers!
Yeah, and meanwhile, the Quantrill guy, like pulls out his gun and starts going full Death Wish on people, and it's like they get to have this fantasy. And in the chaos, Schaefer leaves, right? And there's kind of like think like John Wick or The Warriors. Like this is what the rest of this movie sort of is that he is on the run as every single possible intelligence agency in the world tries to get him. Meanwhile, he's undone. As he flees from a whole series of different like styles of assassins, he takes refuge briefly in like a party bus, like a hippie style.
Hippie van.
Yeah, it's kind of like like a Merry Pranksters style, brightly painted van, where he meets a whole bunch of like central casting dopers, psychedelic types, including a woman who introduces herself as Snow White.
Yes.
Hey, peace. Don't be afraid.
I'm in trouble. Most people are.
We saw them chasing you.
First time I ever saw Chinese fuzz.
If I could just stay in this bus here for a while and rest until I get my breath back.
Just one question. Are you a man of violence?
No.
He's pretty. My name is Snow White. Isn't he pretty, old Wrangler?
We're all pretty, Snow White. Look, we're musicians on our way to the Great Lakes area. Just finished an engagement here. We're going to play up there. You can come with us if you like.
You can sleep in my bed.
There's something I love about the cadence of the speech of the hippies, where the rest of the movie, all of the government personnel are always talking at like 300 words a minute. Everything's very prim proper. Then he meets these hippies and they're like the most laid back man, so slow, so steady. I loved it. It was a very nice, like little second act change up. It was nice.
And so this jam band then goes on the lam with them as they basically drive around, and he one of the most beautiful sequences of the film, or one of the most strangely haunting ones, which is also a physical comedy thing, and it has some elements that are retrograde, is that, well, probably as de rigueur for a film in this era that's doing this countercultural thing, are Sidney Schaefer, who is now wearing bell bottoms and has actually adapted his playing his gong, which we earlier knew as a hobby, into participation in this band, which is a real band, by the way, a band called Clear Light, or was a real band for a period of time.
And honestly, I was totally into them.
They're great.
They sounded awesome.
They're really good. Yeah. And
Dan, I hope you're going to drop some of this. And
oh, yeah.
There's this one particular song that happens where, like, after they're all in a field, these different vans, and they're all hanging out, and they just have a sort of music video kind of situation. And then after sitting around, and it's unclear if they're smoking weed or if there are other drugs involved, but our friend Sidney Schaefer wanders off into this tall grass with
Snow White.
Played by Jill Banner.
Jill Banner. And it's in this classic kind of like 70s eroticism, like they're talking about the world and peace and stress and the need to get away, and then it cuts to a balloon lifting her garment into the sky.
Now is pretty. Love now. I'm now.
Which is another diaphanous white dress. There's a lot of those. She is the counterculture version of the first woman.
Yes.
Like they are both like kind of like fawn-like creatures.
Exactly. However, also in the tall grass, you see an FBI assassin moving up on them. One of these blank-eyed guys in a trilby, putting a silencer on his pistol, and he's about to kill them when suddenly he's strangled by another guy behind him. Right.
This is an incredible sequence, honestly.
And this gimmick continues where like a dozen different spy agencies who have recognizable, like, you know, one has a top knot, one of them is like a Bantu tribesman with a blowgun. Again, some of the shit does not age well and wasn't good even then, but whatever. They keep trying to kill them only to be killed by yet another agent.
Mm-hmm.
And as this is happening, and Schaefer and Snow White are making love.
Well, there's this sort of idea. It's like not only are they all trying to kill him and killing each other, but they're all asymptotically approaching like knowledge.
Yes.
In this, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It is a scene of like paranoia spreading and spreading and spreading, and the camera work is incredible.
Yeah. The lead singer of this band, Bob Seale, is now on his own playing an acoustic version of this really beautiful song called Inner Manipulations, which is all about like relating to change. But as he's singing it in this kind of like anti-war ballad style, you have all these different attempts to kill our couple, culminating ultimately in our friend Kropotkin, the Russian, saving him, even though he doesn't see it. And then our Schaefer and Snow White get up and walk away, and there's a little bit of the field where it's been all patted down because they've had sex. And then as the camera pulls up, you see dozens of bodies of all these assassins who have tried to kill him.
It's a striking image. It's really, you said it right. It's beautiful and haunting.
It's the wreckage of the attempt to access knowledge.
If I go along with the rearrange my mind. It's so strange.
I think it's the superpower of this movie. Like, we spent a lot of time on the opening, which I think is really important to do, where they start with this beautiful gut punch of a very true monologue about like race in America. And then they undercut it with the satire. And then you have this like descent into paranoia where you think you know where the movie's going to go, where the paranoia is just in his mind and it's actually okay. And then they undercut it with, no, the paranoia is actually real and correct and the world is out to get you. And here, beautiful scene with two people making love, talking about freedom and all this stuff. Pull back the camera. Actually, it's an ocean of violence.
Yeah.
And then it leads into a LSD fruit punch.
The surrogate Beatles
Just
show up with their LSD.
Incredible
The Pudlians.
party. It's like all of a sudden we're in like Ken Kesey, like at Merry Pranksters sorts of land. And, it's incredible. Our boy, Dr. Schaefer, is playing the gong.
So at a concert where it's already been alluded to, everyone is doing LSD. Someone spikes the punch with LSD. We
Just
have
a huge
classic
vial.
A bright blue LSD, which is, of course, the way LSD always looks. It sort of throws in with the punch, and the scene becomes a kind of like fragmented type situation where, as he is vigorously playing the gong and his rictus of narcissistic joy is now like this beatific smile, our friend Sidney Schaefer is kidnapped from behind a curtain and wakes up on board a boat, which in the real world is John Wayne's yacht, but which in the purposes of our film is a boat operated by these supposedly British figures called the Pudlians, who are revealed to actually be Canadian Secret Service, and they want to leverage this information.
And they get killed immediately.
Yes, by our friend Kropotkin. And now Kropotkin, who is charming and actually is a very pleasant guy, is sitting on the boat with our friend Schaefer and is telling him about how he's going to defect.
And this is, I think, there's like only two more scenes that I think are really important for us to get to. And one of them is the only time that you really see Schaefer's analytic chops, which is when he's dealing with Kropotkin, who first Schaefer makes it all about himself. He's like, I don't want to be the president's analyst anymore. I'm just a citizen. And Kropotkin is like, okay, well, you're going to defect to Russia. Like, this is going to be your solution. And Schaefer then starts analyzing Kropotkin.
What a spin.
It's so fucking funny.
It's so good. And it's like, and this is actually like a really nice kind of analytic moment at first, except it is also the weaponization of psychoanalysis.
Yes.
But, it's sort of like you're not really mad at him because he is being, kidnapped by an intelligence agent. So if there's an appropriate time to weaponize psychoanalytic wiles, it is at that point.
There you go.
Kropotkin says, and they're in the front of John Wayne's yacht, I'd rather be a sailor if I wasn't a spy. And that's the opening that Schaefer needs.
I love the sea.
For some reason, I couldn't be a spy. I think I'd like to be a sailor.
Really, what is it you love about the sea?
The sea? The sea, my friend, is freedom. Look at it. No boundaries. Here, a man's destiny is his own. It's man against the elements. When I'm at sea, suddenly I feel like a giant.
And did you chose to be a spy? Why don't you find that curious?
Not at all. Aside from the difference in, well, status, they're really very much the same thing. The last refuge of the incurable romantic.
Well, it's, spying. Are you good at it?
If you will forgive my towering immodesty, I am very good at it. Like my father before me.
It quickly evolves into a conversation about Kropotkin's relationship with his father, who it transpires is much higher up in the KGB.
His mother, who his father killed.
Revisionist purges. Like she was she was very warm, typical revisionist. Like,
you really love your father, don't you, Kropotkin?
Love, that's hardly the word. The man is a colossus. He's Peter the Great. He's Ivan the Terrible. You have to see him to believe it. And you probably will see him.
Sort of a super dad, huh?
Yeah.
You hate him, right?
Yeah, I hate it. No, I love him.
Freudian slip? You have said aloud, probably for the first time in your life, that you hate your father.
But this is fascinating. What else do you read in my character?
No, within 5 minutes, Kropotkin is like, I hate my father. He's like, he goes from the idealization of the father to realizing that his father is like a psychopathic monster who's murdered his mother. And he's like, doctor. He doesn't say doctor, but he's like, is there a cure, for like what's wrong with me? And Schaefer is like, yeah, but it'll take 3 to 7 years.
Dr. Schaefer.
Yeah?
Will you take me as a patient?
Well, I don't know what'll happen to me when I go to Russia. I doubt very much whether your father would approve that.
Russia? What's a man like you doing going to Russia? It's a nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. I know, I've lived there.
no more defecting. You need to. You're my patient now,
Yeah.
right?
So it's, he's finally used psychoanalysis to get himself back on top, and they start escaping in this thing that is a boat that's also like a shiny red car.
It's an amphibious car.
It's an amphibious
and it's
car.
adorable.
There are lots of psych gags like this, like changing costumes multiple times during a conversation.
Yes.
Like it's all like so now what we have a situation where our friend, where Kropotkin, much like his friend Don in the American CEA, are now kind of his friend. They're both invested in saving Schaefer from other assassins and from the FBI specifically because they really want to continue their analyses. Right? That's he's their primary preoccupation at this point.
Yeah.
The solution that they arrive at is that they're going to call the president and they're going to work this out, and the president will put the guy from the FBI in his place. Right. Now,
and then the camera pans back.
Shadowy figure
watching them. Yeah. And now it's at this point when we were watching the film that Dan observed something very candidly. He's like, wow, this film, there are all these phones in it and there are operators in it and the phones don't seem to work.
They're always having problems with the operators.
They're always having problems with the operator. Kropotkin leaves Schaefer in a phone booth to get through to the White House because it ate his quarter. After having some byplay about how in the Soviet Union, everyone hates the phone company. In fact, everyone in the world hates their phone company. And this is during a period of phone company like consolidation, et cetera. But
it would translate to modern times complaining about your internet service provider. Yeah.
And we've been seeing ads throughout
It's like complaining about Verizon.
Yeah. And throughout the film, if you watch it the second time, you will see there are ads everywhere for this thing called TPC, the phone company, with a very they're billboards, they're posters, you see workers. There's actually a van that says TPC following Schaefer around for much of the film.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
I missed that.
Yeah. And in any event, while Schaefer is alone in this phone booth, the phone booth locks, a TPC van comes, and a bunch of jackboots emerge from it, throw him inside the phone booth, inside the truck, and drive away and replace the phone booth. And when Kropotkin and Dom return, they're like, where did he go?
Who knew he was here?
Only you and me. And you only knew because I called you from town. And your phone's not tapped.
No. But this booth was.
Are you trying to tell me that every phone in the country is tapped?
That's what's in my head.
Don, this is America, not Russia.
What do you want from me?
But who...
they deduce that the real villains, or the people, the last force that is neither an intelligence agency nor like a foreign power that permeates and surveils and observes everything, and now wants Schaefer, and who is the ultimate big bad of the film, is the phone
company. And I confess I did not see that coming.
It's brilliant.
And
Again,
it's literally
another
like
rug pull.
TPC, the phone company. Well, in the phone company, also, we've seen all of these menacing intelligence agents who are attempting, it's like this whole film is a series of attempted and actual abductions by menacing intelligence agents. And we learn that the seemingly menacing agent from the phone company is actually a robot. Yeah. Like his foot is plugged in.
With our hero still trapped inside the phone booth, which is now put on like a conveyor belt, we arrive at the base of the phone company. And the phone company base is a straight up Bond villain HQ.
It's a lair. It looks like there would be a tank of water with a shark swimming around, underneath where he's perched.
Lots of weird concrete columns and buttons. And
very Austin Powers-y.
Very, yes.
And there is a representative of the phone company who's a very clean-cut, very sympathetic guy who looks actually tremendously like the figure of Bob from the Church of the Subgenius, if any of you are familiar with that.
That's a deep cut.
Yeah, but looks exactly like him, like classic, like smoking a Chesterfield and like smiling in some sort of 1950s ad, who proceeds to talk to Schaefer as he is trapped inside the booth about how, well, wouldn't it be better if communication were easier and we could all communicate with one another wherever we want?
First, you're like, hard to argue with that.
Tiny devices that could be implanted in your body and that would allow the phone company to know your needs, and that you could be always online and connected. There'd be no service interruptions. Imagine the money we'd save.
Remember, you don't have to actually call someone. You would just think their number.
We realize the public has a misguided resistance to numbers. For example, digit dialing.
They're resisting depersonalization.
And so Congress will have to pass a law substituting personal numbers for names as the only legal identification, and requiring a prenatal insertion of the cerebrum communicator. Now then, a communication tax could be levied and paid directly to the phone company.
It'll never happen.
Well, it could happen, you see, if the President of the United States were to use the power of his office to help us mold public opinion and get that legislation.
What they want Schaefer to do is either to lean on the president or give them information they can blackmail the president with, such that the president will sign an emergency authorization changing all Americans' names to phone numbers and requiring the implantation of a phone chip so you could call people on your hands in both adults and in everyone being born going forward.
Right. Yeah. They want to Neuralink the babies going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Schaefer rejects this.
He diagnoses him.
You're a megalomaniac. The phone company is psychotic.
He diagnoses him, and is then subjected to torture, which is more flashing lights and weirdness. But thankfully, our friends, Don and Kropotkin, show up with a pair of like Gen 1 M16s.
Yep.
And they rescue Schaefer, or rather, they help Schaefer rescue himself.
Can I also say one very important detail is that the American agent stated motivation for this is not like national security. He says, if I don't resume my analysis pretty soon, I'm going to flip out.
He says while he's like mowing down people. So the scene here is, initially they want to leave. They want to take Schaefer away, but Schaefer's like, no, this plan, we have to stop it. You're the only one. You have to trust me. And he doesn't even lay out the plan, but apparently he's built such a good therapeutic alliance that a member of the KGB and the CIA will together be like, okay. And they give him a gun.
Extreme emergency. Warning. Come on, Sidney! Extreme emergency.
Now look,
Extreme emergency.
Oh, it's so great. They all shoot their way out.
Running into the base, you essentially have human wave attacks of the phone company workers who dress halfway between postal agents and like parking cops, and they've got and they keep running in, and our heroes have taken position, and now James Coburn is like grinning and laughing wildly.
Yeah, he
says,
Scarface.
Can I do the line?
Please.
He said, so Schaefer says, "Take that, you hostile son of a bitch," which is a beautiful callback to the beginning where he's like, "Oh, you've solved the problem."
Yep, just kill people.
Right, just kill people. No more need for sublimation.
Take that, you hostile son of a...
They destroy the phone company. They get away. Happy ending. Cut to Christmas in D.C. Schaefer is now the president's analyst. It's casually revealed by Don that actually Nan does have security clearance. So if he talks in bed, that's okay. And in fact, he could talk to her about things. Unclear if they're married or not. Live in a like Thomas Kincaid style cottage, and they're having Kropotkin and Don over for Christmas.
They're all best friends now.
They're all best friends. They share important news about their lives. Specifically, well, Kropotkin has solved his father problem.
Congratulations! For what? It was in my evening report. He's now a major general.
Major general?
Yeah!
But there is one thing that you do not know. What's that? I caught my father dealing with red china. I'm now the head of the foreign section.
Yeah, talk about your edible victories.
Yeah. And everything seems perfectly happy, and also the president is about to break up the phone company. But just when you think you're safe, the frame pulls back, and you see them all being watched once again through a screen, not just by the original smiling phone company person, but dozens of clones, all of whom have fiber optic cables running into the heels of their loafers. And that's how the movie ends.
She's ready to be free. It's too plain to see. She's through needing me.
Heartwarming, honestly.
Brilliant.
We're all connected.
We're all connected.
No, I'm kidding.
It seems like part of what's going on with the film is this idea of like limited communication between people that produces important connections and therapy and stuff versus like the totalizing fantasy of perfect transparency and total surveillance. And there's something about how, and I love that we're doing this alongside our little Lacanian sort of excursus in the past few public episodes, because it really does, in a way that, only a spy or a detective film can, right? It dramatizes the question of knowledge as a thing people want.
Yes,
or
desperately want.
And even some of the key roles, right? Like what the president is saying or who the president is. Like, it's unstated. It's a structure. It's a MacGuffin.
I mean, it's not just unstated. It's actually withheld.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, it is like, not only can you not ever reach the object of your desire, you can't even see it.
I guess my other question would be, to close us out, how does it feel watching this in 2024?
I was remaking this in my mind and imagining the phone company as being some kind of like an Elon Musk kind of billionaire thing. Like, I think you could easily remake this with modern reference points and not really change the script at all.
Well, I think, the final bit where it's, we think we've vanquished the phone company. We think we've vanquished this sort of external force that wishes to monitor us and wishes to make us all products of the algorithm, wishes to take away our names and make us numbers. In some basic way, the attitude of this film to that is sort of like, accepting that is pretty much the reality principle.
Yep.
And that is what, to me, makes it feel even more prescient.
That there like is no outside to surveillance and there is no outside to capture. I guess we could say that maybe like the solution, to the extent to which we have one, is that these people all are different characters. So Nan is not even really a character, but
none of the women are characters.
They navigate.
The only real conversations that anyone truly has is about how they want to kill their father.
Yeah, which is, but it also seems like they're able to articulate these problems and to overcome these barriers of like, can I communicate with you or can I not communicate with you? What am I not communicating to myself? How do I enact it or change that in the world? Like they all get their own resolutions, but the overall structures of power don't kind of change, which is fine. It doesn't go like to the full tragic paranoia of, I'm thinking of film like The Conversation or other films from that general era that are about like surveillance and power and what you can or can't control. It definitely feels haunted in the present moment vis-a-vis like, social media type capture, right? And predictive stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you think of like Shoshana Zuboff on surveillance capitalism, for sure.
One thing I thought about in this was also just how delightful it was to watch a movie that's not just about psychoanalysis, but that uses psychoanalytic themes and like asks questions about like what's the purpose of psychoanalysis. If the character arcs are legible as psychoanalytic stories, like his narcissism to his sense of paranoia, etc. And I think that's so much better than other films like where it's just like, oh, let's do psychoanalysis or something approaching psychoanalysis in a zany milieu, like the analyze this, analyze that thing. Like this is much more full barrel. But also at the same time, and is that just thinking about the present moment, which I realize we've kind of put aside and may deal with in a future world analysis because it's so depressing. But part of me is like, I loved the idea of the president actually having an analyst.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about how like that expectation, which of course, would be, I'm not pretending that the 1960s US wasn't doing genocidal horrible things and with worse to come. I'm not saying that ipso facto would have made things better if we would have that now, but I'm neither romanticizing that nor being idealistic now. Watching a movie about the president having an analyst and everyone wanting to know the important secrets and interiority that president divulges felt like a transmission from another planet, because right now I would just like to see the president, post let stupid shit on Twitter and draw a fucking clock.
Yeah.
Like that's the degree of therapy and interior access I would like to have proven.
Yeah.
Like,
it strikes me that in a film that is entirely about paranoia and paranoiac knowledge and secrecy and like the inability to actually ever gain this secret, the only thing that the film shows faith in is the process of analysis.
yeah. And maybe that's one way that we can think about this film now in a moment in which, like, sure, there still are secrets, but if anything, the problem is not the withholding of knowledge or the inability to track it down. It's being overwhelmed and not knowing what to do with it.
There's also no misinformation, particularly in this. You know what I mean? It's about secrecy, it's about paranoia, but it's not really about like misdirection.
No.
It's funny that you say that because this film as an object is fascinating outside of itself. Like the paranoia and secrecy, the misdirection that happened with this film was the literal United States government censoring the names of the bureaus. Or like cutting out entire sequences that are now lost to time, like including one that I wish I could find it, but apparently there was a sequence where he interacts with a pyramid with an eyeball embedded in it that the FBI specifically cut out, which is kind of fascinating. I'd want to learn more about that.
Yeah, the secret FBI office beneath the Denver airport. They really don't want us to know about that one.
It is just fascinating that a film about secrets and paranoia was completely stunted, censored, put out into the theaters, then removed from theaters, and essentially like killed the career of the filmmaker that made what is like one of the most cutting, informative, better aged pieces of satire that I think I've ever seen.
And it's interesting too, as I think about it more, that like this is a moment in which there's still, like, historically speaking, there's a ton of misinformation, right? Like,
absolutely.
Like the U.S. like involvement in Cambodia at this point, like it's not like as intense as it's going to bet, but that's being hidden from people. We're only, it's weird how this is a pre-Watergate film in some ways too, but also it's like the plumbers burgling Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office, right?
But knowledge is something here that can be attained. It's not something that is being covered up. That's not the way that it's being figured.
And it's certainly not being covered up or made impossible to obtain by pushing everything out into the open and making it almost impossible to distinguish, if not between truth and falsehood, but then between which is the most urgent one of these things that's being bared for you to focus on, right? It does feel, even as it is a very postmodern sort of movie, right down to the decor and to the unstable narratives and to the themes, which are very Lacanian in their way. Like we could read The Telephone Company as the big other.
This is the big other. Yeah.
It's the possibility of communication, right? They want to be able not just see behind your own head. Like they want to see your body from within. It still also doesn't feel quite like whatever happens now, right? I'm trying to think about this film or what this film might say or how you might remake this film in an era of, I don't know, chat GPT therapy, or also an era in which like all therapy has to take place, or most therapy for periods of time had to take place over, quote unquote, the phone company because of a plague.
Would you recommend this film?
Oh yeah. I've already recommended this film to a couple of people.
I think this film is great.
4 out of 5, 5 out of 5, water, boat, sea, cars.
Yeah, I'll go 4 out of 5. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
I love this movie. I think it's great. I'd like to see more cheeky, psychoanalytically informed political thrillers / comedy.
Let us know if you watch it. And we do take requests for wild analysis. So hit us up on Patreon or Instagram or wherever.
I'd love to see listeners' takes on the Discord.
Oh,
That'd be
yeah,
great.
absolutely. So Patreon subscribers, because you are the ones who are listening to this, thank you so much for your support. If we could ask you to rate and review, we would be enormously grateful. We will be back next week with the third, and I am absolutely not going to promise that it will be the final installment of our excursion through Lacan's mirror stage. We'll see you then. Bye.
Langley, are you getting all this?
This has been an episode of Ordinary Unhappiness, a podcast about psychoanalysis, politics, pop culture, and the ways we suffer now. I'm Abby Kluchin, and today I was joined by Patrick Blanchfield and Dan Yowell. This podcast is produced by Dan Yowell. Theme music by Formal Chicken.
Shall we rescue our doctor?
Yeah, if I don't resume my analysis pretty soon, I'm gonna flip out.